Good morning. My name is Ben Zong. I'm the Online Communications Manager for the California Fiscal Partnership. Thank you for joining our California Hydrogen Policy Series. This is the second of several briefings that we'll be hosting. A couple of administrative items before we get started. Today's webinar, everyone will be muted. However, you do have the opportunity to ask questions, and so please do use the GoToWebinar questions feature. The webinar will be recorded. After the presentation, the webinar recording and presentation slides will be posted and shared via email. During the webinar, we will have our cameras turned on, or at least the panelists will have their cameras turned on. You have the option to change the view by using the shifter. You can also completely remove the webinar or the webcams and see just the presentation if you desire. At the California Fiscal Partnership, we are a collaboration of over 50 industry and government organizations with the goal of bringing organizations together to work on expanding the market for hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicle to help create a cleaner future. And so with that, I'm going to pass off to Bill Elrick, the California Fiscal Partnership Executive Director. Bill?
Thanks, Ben. And as Ben said, welcome everyone to this, our second policy-related briefing on hydrogen and the potential role it can play in California. We're really excited to bring this series with you, or to you, with the help of our partners, the California Hydrogen Business Council and the California Hydrogen Coalition. And I am Bill Elrick. I'm the Executive Director of the California Fuel Cell Partnership. I'm going to serve as both moderator and facilitator of today's briefing. So we're really excited today because for our second briefing, we have Bernd Heid. He's a senior partner with McKinsey Company. And just before we get started, I want to give you a little bit of a breadth of his understanding as far as mobility and hydrogen. So bear with me with this biography for a second as we set this table. So Bernd works out of McKinsey's Cologne office, where he's a member of their leadership team and part of their automotive sector. He also is a leader with McKinsey's work on the commercial vehicle segment. He leads McKinsey's hydrogen service line globally, and he serves various clients on solutions related to the future of mobility, the energy sector, and especially around hydrogen. He works with clients such as the World Economic Forum and their future of mobility, the Global Battery Alliance, as well as leading McKinsey's work for the Hydrogen Council and its member companies. So with that, the last bit of experience I think is really relevant to today's conversation. I think you're going to see some of the outputs of this are the reports he led the collaboration with the Hydrogen Council, their scaling up and their cost roadmap reports, as well as the work he's done on various regional and national hydrogen roadmaps. These are some really exciting documents coming out, and he's done some for France, Korea, Europe, and the United States. So there's a lot of great material for him to work with in this, what will be a pretty quick, short time when we start to go through them. So with that, I want to thank you, Bernd, for really agreeing to appear with us. I'm looking forward to some of your information and sharing it with others and then having a little discussion afterwards. So welcome, Bernd.
Thank you, Bill. And also thank you for having me here. We know each other for many years, and I myself am now in the hydrogen space for over a decade. And I must say, this has been felt like swimming against the current for many, many years. And we see such a tremendous momentum right now in the sector. So therefore, I'm more than pleased and excited to be here with you. What I would love to focus probably the next 30 minutes on is to share a brief outlook on the hydrogen opportunity globally. So I give you a bit of our perspective on the demand outlook in the various sectors, but also very important to share a bit on the competitiveness in the various applications, because that's one of the key drivers why we see that momentum, and also at least makes me believe that this is something that is here to stay and not just one of the various ups and downs that we have seen. We will have sufficient time for your questions and Q&A, so therefore I would love to start off with a short overview, and then we we have an open conversation and certainly can address some of their questions. Let me start with a page on the overview on what are the 6 themes that we see right now in hydrogen. So first of all, the key question, why hydrogen and why hydrogen now, is number one is that we see, if we are serious about deep decarbonization, hydrogen is a must-have. So there are sectors, we call them hard-to-abate sectors, that will be difficult to mitigate or avoid CO2 if we do not use hydrogen. Hydrogen is a versatile energy carrier, both for storage and also transportation of energy. So that's why we see certain sectors where hydrogen is a must-have. Second, we see an unprecedented momentum right now globally, and that's really has been accelerating in the past 18 to 24 months. I think the grouping of the Hydrogen Council has clearly set a milestone in this. So I was part of the group in 2017 in Davos, Switzerland, when this group got together. It's a CEO-led initiative of companies that have a vested interest along the value chain. This group has grown from 17 in 2017 to now more than 90 members. And that shows also how much momentum is in the private sector and determination to really make a contribution to decarbonization. Number 3 is a growth. And you will see more in the slides that I will share. So we will see a 10x growth of hydrogen over the next decades until 2050. Even more so, the growth of decarbonized hydrogen in the next decade will be even higher. So therefore, I will share some of that. Most importantly is number 4, where we see a cost decline of the production of hydrogen, but also its application. So this increased cost competitiveness was new news when we first compiled that report with the members of the Hydrogen Council, because it showed that hydrogen is not only a great pathway to decarbonize, but also it comes with a business case in many applications. It's cost competitive. And number 5 is that in many of these applications, we really work in ecosystems. You barely see a single company moving. It's in most of the cases an ecosystem from hydrogen production, distribution, storage in the individual end usage. And it's also an ecosystem between private sector players and players from the public side to support that transition. And last but not least, also on the government side, we see a great determination in using hydrogen as a pathway to decarbonize. I'm speaking here from Germany in Europe, so we have seen governments across Europe moving fast on that. That's despite the fact that we have troubled economies due to COVID, and still we see determination in investing into the sector. That makes me also confident that we will see more of that. But of course, Europe is just one of the hotspots. I speak here to leaders in California. California has been pioneering the space alongside with countries like Japan, Korea, China, Middle East, and others. So let me talk you through the individual analyses. On the next slide, you see for reference the overview, what do we mean with the hydrogen economy, and that's the value chain from you need hydrogen for the feeding in of renewables. That is where we make the energy system resilient in transforming renewable energy into hydrogen as an energy carrier. The middle portion is the storage and the distribution part, where hydrogen really can play to its sweet spot. It will be otherwise difficult to store energy in the seasonal volatility or transport energy over long distance. Think of Australia to Japan, think of Chile to the US or Middle East to Europe. And on the right side, you see the various sectors where hydrogen can play a role to decarbonize. Transportation is what we see on the roads, not only cars, but also heavy duty trucks, buses. Hydrogen can be used in aviation, marine applications, and alike. Second category is decarbonization of building heat and power. Think of backup storage for data centers. To decarbonize that would be massively expensive to use batteries. So here hydrogen can play a role. Industry, everywhere where we need high-grade heat. Think of cement, think of steel making, especially when it comes to decarbonizing the steel manufacturing, the iron ore process to DRI pellets. That's where we use hydrogen as a reduction element. And last but not least, that's hydrogen as feedstock. Hydrogen is not a new molecule. We use that for many decades, and hydrogen has been used in, for example, refineries, in ammonia production, when it comes to fertilizer production. So the only disadvantage is here we use hydrogen that is so-called gray hydrogen, because it's made from a process that is CO2 emitting, that steam methane reforming. So therefore, in this whole segment of the chemical and refinery industries, we decarbonize by switching from a CO2 emitting process to a renewable process or a carbon capture process. So that's why we also decarbonize this process industry. So an exemplary calculation on the next page, and that is being done for Europe. You see various sectors on this slide. And we color-coded this page depending on what energy form is best used to decarbonize that segment. The little squares you see are proportional to the CO2 emissions. Europe has a total CO2 emission of roughly 4 gigatons of CO2 equivalent each year. And you see light blue is where hydrogen is ideal or best suited to help to decarbonize. That's large areas of the industry, also parts of transport, and also building heat and power. We have gray, color-coded gray, where direct electrons from renewable are cheaper and better suited to decarbonize. That's when we speak of baseload electricity, while transforming first electricity into molecule and then back. So therefore here it's better whenever you have the chance to directly use that electricity, we would use the electrons directly. And then you have the middle portion on the transport sector, where you also see batteries in there. So clearly our analysis also shows, if you speak of short distance urban mobility, batteries can be very compact and are the cheaper source to decarbonize. And there is a middle blue portion in there where it's really an either or. So therefore, we do not see batteries and fuel cells or batteries and hydrogen as competing technology, but rather they are very complementary. And it really depends on the use case, whether the one or the other has the better TCO in terms of cost per usage or per mile driven. So therefore here you see basically that we can use both, and I will speak more about that on various use cases. So page 5 is an illustration of the recent momentum And what you see on this slide is the pickup of electrolyzer capacity globally. As we speak of today, we have roughly 100 megawatt of installed capacity, which is close to zero. And you see that this goes up to some range of 34 gigawatt until the end of the decade. And we will even see 13.6 gigawatt of projects until the mid of the decade. And we have three different color codes, because the interesting part on this slide is, if I had shown this June of last year, I would have come with the message that we grow from 100 megawatt by 20x to 2 gigawatt. And what we see is more or less, you see the dates to it. March 2020, this year we were at 18.6 gigawatt, and then it grew to 34 gigawatt until October. And as we speak, this is growing, and this is not just a McKinsey projection, but what we see here are real projects that are behind these individual slides. So globally, we expect something of around 60 to 100 gigawatts until the end of the decade, and that is what we will see growing over the next years. On the next slide, you will see the breakdown of the same slide just into the various regions. And what you see here is also that we have right now, as we speak, very little of that capacity in North America. Most of that happens as we speak right now in Europe, in Asia. A lot of that happens in China, and also Middle East as the main hotspots for the growth. This is a snapshot, of course, as we speak, and you see the projects on the right side. That's the announced projects that we see up until today, and as we speak, there are new projects coming in each day. So let us have a look at the main driver for this increased deployment of hydrogen production. That's on the next page, where you see the cost curve for hydrogen in the various pathways. And the way how to read this chart is, you see three colors, gray being gray hydrogen as a synonym for hydrogen made from steam methane reforming. That's a CO2 emitting process. That's why we call it gray hydrogen. You see blue hydrogen being referred to as hydrogen from steam methane reforming, but you capture the CO2 that is emitted and basically either store it in caverns or underground, or you use it in chemical processes. And green hydrogen, that's hydrogen made from renewables, where you see a range of today somewhere between $3 to $6 per kilogram of produced hydrogen. And the wide range is determined by the cost of energy. So you can almost say the lower dotted line, that is areas like Arizona or parts of California, where you really have best cost available for renewable power. The upper solid line, that's more when you have average renewable costs, such as in parts of Europe. That's why you have this band. And the main news that we got here is that between today and 2030, we see the cost declining by 60% in the green hydrogen production. That is when hydrogen comes into an area of $2 per kilogram. Why the $2 is so important is because at that point it is cost competitive to also gray or blue hydrogen, and also at this cost it is meaningful to deploy it in various end users, so that the use cases become cost competitive. That is the main driving force for this. The reason why hydrogen comes down between today and the next 10 years is largely driven by the electrolyzer. That's the machine that splits up water into its elements, into hydrogen and oxygen. So that's a highly energy consuming process. So therefore the main contributor to that is the cost of energy, which you see in the bandwidth. And then you have the capex of the machine that breaks up water into its components. That's the main reason for bringing down the cost. And this is of course very regional. So let us have a look at the overarching landscape globally on the next page. And the way how we did it is we put on the left side the world map color coded in areas where you see dark green is best cost production areas for green hydrogen from renewables. On the right side, you see a similar chart for blue hydrogen that is made out of natural gas. And of course, you need to have carbon capture and storage processes available. And you see, of course, that we will see a coexistence also of both green and blue hydrogen. And it's mainly determined by the availability of renewable power, of cheap natural gas, and also the availability of carbon capture processes. And here you see that the US, clearly with the Gulf Coast area, and also parts of the western part of the US is well suited to be at cost competitive levels on a global level for low carbon hydrogen. But we see, of course, also exporting hubs, be it Australia, be it Middle East, North Africa, for Europe. And what is difficult to read, but nevertheless important to mention, is that you have Chile, a tiny strip on the west coast of Latin America, with best cost available for renewable hydrogen. And switching gears to the government momentum that we see around the globe, and this is just a snapshot on the next page, where you see multiple different regions across the globe are moving. If we switch to the next page, you see that Japan was leading in the early 2018s or 2017, coming out with their plan to deploy hydrogen not only in transportation but also other sectors. But what we have seen in the past 24 months is really that governments around the globe stepped up their game, and each of the little flags comprises of a government that has a hydrogen roadmap existing. Many of those roadmap I had the pleasure to support. So therefore, I could see the seriousness of the plans behind. Think of Germany putting in 9 billion euros for the production and import of hydrogen. You have even smaller economies in Europe, like Spain or Portugal or Denmark moving. Europe as a whole has a very ambitious plan on the European Green Deal to move. And here we also see, of course, the efforts that we see around California. So therefore, for the international community, California is an important economy. If it were standalone, that is worthwhile noting on the international hydrogen front. So altogether, what we see right now is a plan of roughly 75 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity. That is also roughly the ballpark of what is required to bring down the cost curve from $6 per kilogram, as you have seen earlier today, to something that is in the range of $2. So let's have a short look at the demand side of the equation. And here you see various sectors on the next page, where hydrogen will be deployed. And if we move one page further, you see as of today, we have an equivalent of 2,700 terawatt hours of energy being deployed in hydrogen. That's to 100% is existing feedstock in the chemical and petrochemical industry. You see new applications adding to it. That is transportation, power generation, industry, so that it sums up to something that is 21,800 terawatt hours. To give you a reference, that is roughly 18% of global total energy demand by 2050. So it's quite significant amount of energy. When we first published that figure, we had a large debate. Is that too ambitious? Is it too early? Can hydrogen contribute to it? But if you look today in the press and other sources like IRENA, like IEA, like Bloomberg New Energy Finance, you will find very similar ranges of figures that had been published thereafter. So therefore, we confirmed more or less these figures also with other sources. And one piece of information that I would love to highlight on here, you could argue that the growth in the next 10 years is not so massive because it grows from 2,700 to 3,900. However, if you think that in today's hydrogen production, there's literally zero decarbonized hydrogen, the growth from zero decarbonized hydrogen to something in the range of 2,000 terawatt hours, that's a massive growth. And that explains also why we see such an extraordinary momentum right now, because we will, next to the growth into new applications, we see the replacement of the gray hydrogen in the process as we go. Page 11 is a snapshot out of the cost competitiveness roadmap that I alluded to earlier. What you see on this chart is 35 different applications along these sectors where hydrogen can play a role. And we answered more or less two basic questions. Number one, is hydrogen more or less cost competitive than the conventional alternatives, be it diesel, be it natural gas, as a power source? And that's to the right side. So everything that's to the right side, hydrogen is more competitive than the conventional one. But this is not sufficient. So we also asked the question, is hydrogen more or less competitive to the next best low carbon alternative, be it biomethane, be it battery electric power and alike? And what you see on this chart, and we collected the data together with the members of the Hydrogen Council in a clean team approach. So you can imagine that as a process where we collected 25,000 data points from all of the companies along the value chain. This was not only hydrogen data, but also hydrogen plus other alternative low carbon energy sources in data. And we compiled in the process, we used the clean team in order to comply with antitrust regulation, a model that in the end compares these different applications. And everything that is in the upper right corner, hydrogen is a no regret move, because it not only is the best zero emission technology, but it's also better than the conventional one. So you see applications like heavy duty trucking, you see forklifts in there, but you also see passenger car vehicles in there. And while this might be surprising, the rationale for that is that you have in certain use cases, if you drive long enough or the vehicle is heavy enough, then you also have use cases where hydrogen as a power source is the best economic source. So you see, for example, taxi fleet, and here the rationale is that a taxi fleet typically is operational many hours a day, so utilization matters, fulfilling time matters. That's where hydrogen can play its strengths. You also see conventional cars like a large passenger car or an SUV, where you have use cases that cater towards the advantages of hydrogen. But also on the contrary, not surprisingly, in the lower left corner, you see, for example, cars that we call compact urban cars, that are cars that have a daily mileage of less than 60 miles, where you commute to work and do not carry much load. So here the battery is not surprisingly a great alternative, simply because you can squeeze in a smaller battery. So that's that also was confirmed by the analysis. And then you have applications that go beyond transportation. Think of steel making, think of decarbonizing refineries, think of ammonia production in the fertilizer industry, so as additional applications. And page 12 is a comparison where we double-clicked on, in this case, for example, heavy-duty trucking. So the way how to read that chart is on the x-axis you see time, and on the y-axis you see three curves that show you the cost, total cost of ownership. So literally the cost per mile driven, and you see the reference is the yellow line, that's diesel as a combustion engine powered Class 8 truck, and you see blue is hydrogen in a fuel cell, white is battery electric. And you see two tipping points. The one is already by 2023, we see that the fuel cell, from its pure economics, is a better alternative than battery electric. That is because if we want to go long haul, long distance Class 8 trucking, we need massive batteries in the range of 700, 800 kilowatt hours of capacity. So that adds cost and also adds weight to that business case, so that fuel cell are the best power source in comparison to battery electric. And then a very interesting one is that in 2027, we see a tipping point vis-a-vis diesel. This is actually the reason why we see that great momentum right now behind the commercial vehicle industry. You have seen the news on Daimler and Volvo cooperating on the development of fuel cell trucks. That's the reason behind Nikola and High Zone Motors as purpose-built vehicles for this application, because we simply see a cost advantage vis-a-vis diesel. And this is just exemplary. We could go through other segments like buses, like medium duty. So tipping points and timing is different, but that explains why we see in certain applications hydrogen being the key application. And let me just show one overview chart. And that is the next one, chart 13, where you have different use cases. And while I know that this is difficult for you to read on the screen, I just tell you that there are three different segments. That a mid-size vehicle, a typical family car, it's an SUV, and it's also a panel van, a large vehicle, where you have the comparison of different use cases. And all of these cases, if you have the right parameters, and for example, if you drive a family car just long enough and you need a range that is in this calculation here, it's European numbers, but equivalent, we could do the math for the US. If you go beyond 300 kilometers, for example, you have a tipping point where the fuel cell is the better alternative to battery. And of course, you see that this is a fine line. So if you have smaller vehicles, shorter distance, then of course you also have in the same vehicle segment battery as a best alternative. So I think this chart also undermines that this is not an either or that it's just bound to the physical shape of a car, but it's really determined by the use of that vehicle that you needed in what is the best power source in the form of decarbonization. And let me share one more fact on the cost side, and that is on the infrastructure. And we did one exemplary calculation on the next slide where we compared two scenarios. So on the left side, you see a fuel cell world, and on the right side, you see battery electric world. And what we did is we just calculated the same infrastructure cost. In this case, it was done for an application in Germany, where we said, let's assume a world where we have a penetration of below 0.1%, so literally just a few thousand vehicles. And on the fuel cell side, and you see on the right side, you see the cost of the infrastructure. And the top row says, if we are in this world of first adopters, the fuel cell infrastructure sums up to something like $16,000 per vehicle, which is a very natural calculation, because you need, for very few cars, you need first of all to install a whole array of the filling stations to make the economics work. While on the battery side, this only is $3,000. And the reason for that is you can much more flexibly deploy pole chargers at home. You can have overnight charging without much infrastructure. So therefore, in terms of infrastructure costs, battery electric outperforms in the early adopter case fuel cell. And however, this flips over time. So think then of a world where you have a deployment of the technology of more than 20%. That's the lower line that you see here. You see two effects. So the one is on the fuel cell side, we will have a dilution of the cost, and that comes through the better utilization and the scaling up of that infrastructure that can be used by more vehicles. So the costs come down per vehicle and will be diluted to something like 5,000. While for the battery electric use case, we need to massively invest also in grid infrastructure, and that has to do with the electrical grid in many parts of the world. The distribution grid or the last mile is something that can sustain 7.5 kilowatts. So if we need many vehicles in one row to be charged, or if we have 350 kilowatts fast charging, that is investments that we need to deploy into the grid. And that's why we see an upgrade also on the cost side that goes along with the grid upgrade. So therefore, I put in this analysis to show that there are different horizons on what we will see, and that is also once again an example of showing the complementary of these two technologies. So it's not a world where we see either battery or fuel cell, but we see these two technologies literally adjacent next to each other. And let me finish with one summary slide on what we would see or need collectively in order to unlock the various momentums that we see. And this is not something that the industry can do alone, but here we really have the joint work of the industry on the private side, governments and the public sector, as well as the financial community. And if we analyze that around the world, we see, for example, governments that put in plans and policies and frameworks that enable investments into the sector. A lot of that has to do with risk mitigation and stability of offtake. We have seen schemes and mechanisms like feed-in tariffs. Japan is, for example, using that for hydrogen that they import. We have planting mandates and the like. So there's a whole array of supporting mechanisms from the public side. The industry here, it is really important to leverage existing industries in brownfield infrastructures. Think of the grid, also the natural gas grid that otherwise will be stranded assets can be repurposed. Think of refineries that can be used to decarbonize and reduce scope 1 and 2 emissions. And also here it is important to work along the value chain, because we really see integrated plays that are not done by individual players, but along the value chain. And then on the financing side, here we also have a new market being deployed. So if you speak to the professional investor community, hydrogen doesn't fit into the classical buckets of venture capital or classical private equity or infrastructure funds. Often hydrogen is cutting across these, but I literally talked to 20 plus institutions in just the past few months, and I see a lot of momentum and also creativity that comes from the financial sector side in order to make that transition happen. And to just close with a figure, we roughly ballparked the estimated investment that will be needed over the next decade. That's a number of $260 billion from hydrogen production to the deployment. So clearly there is neither a shortage of investment opportunities, and I have also not seen a shortage of the willingness to invest and seek for opportunities. So therefore, I think that for that reason, we also see a continued momentum forward-looking. And here I would like to pause and pass over to Bill. Bill, I'm sure you will have questions, and also the audience might have posed some questions already. Bill.
Oh, but plenty of questions, Bernd. Thank you so much. This reminds me every time we speak, whether it's here digitally or back when we would have coffee in person, you bring so much to the table. It is constantly such a wonderful wealth of knowledge and just creates more questions at the same time. So thank you. With that, just a clarification, you said that $260 billion number, is that global? Is that US?
That's global. That's a global figure.
Okay. I'll come back to that, but I want to, so many questions, we have a lot coming in, so I'm going to try to put them together in some spots that'll cover hopefully plenty of them in the time we have. I think the biggest one I want to start with is California, really aggressive with accelerating the deployment of ZEBs. We're working on decarbonizing the grid, the renewable energy transition overall, just really hard at work at this right now. And I'm curious, in all the work you've shown and all the work you've done, what would be the most, and it really looks maybe a little like your last slide, but the most important lessons we can take here in California from all of these experiences? What are the actions, the strategies that we should focus on that really tips this forward the best way possible? If you had to have that elevator speech of, here's what I recommend for California.
So first of all, let me start with true admiration for what California has done so far. So therefore, when we look at different hotspots and regions, I often mention California for areas where you are leading. The one thing that I would love to reflect on is like this hydrogen transition is not a single sector application. So we should not think of this is hydrogen for transportation, this is hydrogen for blending into the grid for heating. In the end, successful hydrogen deployments happen across sectors. So where you have a port infrastructure, think of what you do in the port of LA, where you have industrial clusters around. So that's a combination of hydrogen production, hydrogen distribution, various end users, from transportation to heating to industry to refining. That's where in the end hydrogen can really play to its strength, because you better utilize this whole energy vector. If you only focus it on a single application, often the investment that you need to do from production to end users doesn't justify the business case. So that's one reflection. And the second one is to work also with the public side and the financial community to really think through what is necessary to de-risk these business cases. Most of the cases, it's like a stable offtake that you have, or an agreement, a power purchase agreement, and the like, where you give stability. It's like when I speak to the industry around the globe, it's less the ask for straight subsidies into a specific use, but rather the stability that this risk that is embedded into the deployment of the various applications, that there's a mitigation path to it. And that's being creative around mechanism that can de-risk the deployment. That's, I think, also something what we can learn not only in California but around the globe from great case examples as of today.
So really de-risking that environment so that $260 billion number can be something private enterprise can come in and take advantage of and push us forward.
Absolutely.
And the sector coupling. I love the recognition of all the work you've done. And I can say that from our seat, both in California and in the fuel cell partnership focused on transportation. A lot of great progress, a lot of great work. But seeing how far hydrogen can go, I think always impresses me as I learn a little bit more from presentations like yours or others who are working on these other, amazing opportunities for this.
And let me add one comment. California, of course, plays a role in the wider nationwide ecosystem. If you think of, for example, heavy-duty transport, most of the trucks that are in and out California, they don't stop at the boundaries to Arizona and the like. So therefore, that's really something where California can also play a pivotal role for showcasing what the US can do in total, because I think a lot of these applications are not regionally bound and end at the borders of California, but really go beyond and can really unlock or enable a further deployment across the nation.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really impressive I've seen in the decade we've been here as well. The changeover from, we used to talk to our friends in Europe and Germany and Japan and Asia and connect on the strategies we were all taking. But what is, I'll say, an observation of mine is clearly this is now a global market. It's interconnected. We are learning from each other. We're taking on some different strategies. And that to me is a big change I see in how important it is, not just reference cases, but really actually leveraging each other. I'm curious, just to stay on this for another moment or two, when you look back at some of the first strategies like Japan 3 years or so ago, they put theirs out, they've now had time to digest that, reflect and act upon that. Or things here in California we've done, mostly transportation focused. Is there anything else in those early lessons or that California has done well, others can and should learn from?
I think what you see from the early pioneers like California, like Korea, like Japan, is that you see it starts off with a nucleus. You need to get a hydrogen economy going in certain applications. You hear the Japanese speaking of, they speak of a hydrogen society. And what they really mean is like they showcase different applications from heating. So if we had the Olympic Games in Japan this year, we would have seen a large displaying of hydrogen technologies from buses. The Olympic Village would have been powered by hydrogen and so on. And this is nothing else than showing this cosmos of all different applications into one model city or one model society and the economy. And what we see now, that's more or less a few years down the road from these early pioneering, we see more a global interconnection. So you see, for example, many of the players and also the members of the California Fuel Cell Partnership that you have shown on your intro slides, they are all leaders in their respective fields on a global level. So often this doesn't happen in regionally bound cases, but this is really what we see now is an interconnecting of these pioneering cells. And if you will, California is one, Europe is one, Korea, Japan, Middle East, but in the next horizon, we see more interconnected energy systems there, but also as an export market. A lot of them operate on the component side. Think of fuel cells, think of electrolyzers. There's a lot of technological innovation involved, and that is also, of course, part of the 260 billion that I alluded on earlier, where we see export markets on the component and the system side that comes along with the production and the sales of the molecules.
Yeah, that strikes upon me there. Some of your graphics on the renewable hydrogen growth and the opportunities there, and I'm curious how, just to play with that a little bit, you know, the hydrogen infrastructure from production on, but really around production. What are either some of the guidance, the lessons on how we can turn that knob a little bit more, a little bit faster to achieve that kind of renewable growth, to be there right alongside the other colors and be there faster? You know, we won't get there today, but we can get there tomorrow at some point. And that's a question on probably policy, but in comparison to wind and solar, is this something similar where we might be amazed at the growth? It seems like it could be that way. What are your thoughts on that, the colors of hydrogen, and how do we get the most out of that?
So first of all, I think there will be a coexistence of colors in the future. I've just alluded on 3 colors, yeah. And forgive me, I did not invent that color scheme, so therefore there are more colors out there. We have hydrogen being produced with pyrolysis. That's taking solid carbon out. That's called turquoise. We have hydrogen from nuclear power. That's sometimes referred to red hydrogen. So therefore, what we will really see is a coexistence of different colors. I truly believe that we will see both dominantly green and blue, yeah, for the simple reason that we have these resources available, and it is important that it's decarbonized. Yeah. So therefore, hydrogen, just as a substitute in terms of carbon emitting hydrogen, gray hydrogen, does not do the trick. So all of these applications only make sense. We only deploy hydrogen because we want to decarbonize it. So therefore, there's a debate ongoing. What is the share in the end of green versus blue? Yeah. So it's really difficult to judge that, but I'm very confident that this is rather two strong camps than one really dominating. Yeah? And that's simply for the reason that we have them both in the same ballpark of cost competitiveness, and we have different preferences of governments and societies around the globe for do we want carbon capture or not. And on the deployment, I pretty much see an analogy to renewable power deployment of the past decade, yeah? Be it wind, be it solar. So we had a cost decline of renewable power by 80% just in between the decade from 2010 to 2020. And what we see right now happening on the green hydrogen production is a very similar process where today's electrolyzers are being built at literally megawatt scale. So that's 10, that's 20, 50, or sometimes 100 megawatt scale electrolyzer. And we see that being scaled up both on the alkaline side as well as on the PEM side. We see first projects that operate at or are being planned on a gigawatt scale. And this scaling up from a manufacturing process that is often in batches and still a lot of manual labor work in it, to a more industrialized process that brings down the cost of these components. So therefore, we see the cost of an electrolyzer, for example, falling from today more in the range of 700, 800 US dollar per kilowatt of the electrolyzer machine to something that is 400 US dollar or below in the next decade. And the main reason for that, it's not a change in technology, but it's rather the scaling up from small scale production to something that is industrialized. So therefore, I think that analogy to solar or wind is absolutely viable, because that process of industrialization also brings down the cost of these equipments, and though also the cost of decarbonized hydrogen.
Do you think that large-scale electrolyzer will also come down to, I'll say, the small scale, say an on-site? Will that translate in time down to kind of small versus large scale across the board competitiveness?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, or I'm very positive that still a large-scale production is per kilogram cheaper than a small-scale on-site. So no doubt about it. But if you think of what happens in the electrolyzer manufacturing, that's like modules. You do not build a monolithic machine of 1 gigawatt versus a machine of, let me say, 10 megawatt. But in the end, also a large-scale gigawatt electrolyzer will comprise of individual modules that are just bundled and stacked together. So therefore, we benefit as a whole industry from this cost decline, regardless of whether that's an on-site decentral electrolyzer that just produces the hydrogen, for example, for a refilling station for commercial vehicles, versus you have really that centralized production, be it at scale, several gigawatts in the desert of Saudi Arabia or in Chile or in California or Arizona. Yeah, so therefore, this will be, the cost decline will happen across the board regardless of scale. And also there, one question is always, do we see more centralized production and then distribution, or more decentralized production? I think that depends pretty much on the application. And here we see also 3 different ways: the very decentralized, like the refilling station, an electrolyzer that is coupled to an end use, such as steel making, and also the large scale centralized production that will occur in parallel.
When I hear you say this, and I look back at the slides you presented and just the conversations we've had over the years, what really is amazing is that this sector coupling, this ability to have the right policies that de-risk the investment, the private investment market, all of this kind of feeds each other towards this future that we're all looking for here in California, US, the world. It's really an exciting time for us all, and I'm really pleased with the work you've done to kind of put it into a perspective, give us some analysis on the opportunities and the challenges that we're going to need to overcome together. So I'm looking, we have a lot of questions. I think I've tried to get at some of the biggest ones. I'm going to look over to Ben if there's anything pressing in these questions that you see we should, because I see we're also at the top of our hour. Well, with that, I could go on forever with you, Bernd. I'm looking forward to the next time we do talk, either like this or a little less formally. I do want to thank you, but I want to give you kind of a last opportunity to talk about what we should all do next, how we might go forward. I think you covered a lot of things, but in reference, what I'm really looking at, thinking of some of the folks who have pitted the two ZEV technologies against each other, or some of the words now, especially out of the Europe, where it's a race to kind of win the hydrogen market. You know, what positive advice and input would you give us towards bringing all these things together?
That's $1 million question, Bill. So therefore, thank you for that. I think it's not a race that will be over in a year or two. So we speak here of really a transition that will follow with us for a decade, 2 decades. So that's a whole transition. So therefore, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And all what I can say is, I see with whomever I talk, I see rather acceleration of the momentum than a slowdown. So therefore, I expect more to come in the next few years. While we speak, we are currently working on an update on this cost roadmap that you also mentioned in the intro, that we are working on with the members of the Hydrogen Council. So we will release that in January. So stay tuned for that. All what I can say at this point is that most of the indicators on the cost decline or deployment or competitiveness are rather improving and going in the right direction than the opposite. So therefore, I think this is a whole transition, and the coupling of the various applications, that is what is key. So let's look for opportunities to de-risk the deployment, because then also the business cases are bankable plans, and where we also find then both private sector money and also public money to support that transition. Thank you, Bill, again for having me. Like always, a pleasure. I hope that sooner or later we will meet again in person. But thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to speak here.
Well, thank you. Pleasure's all mine, all of us on this side. So I'll commit to you. We'll continue to work on, especially focused on the transportation side and moving this forward for others to learn from our experiences, and then look to learn and leverage what you and others around are doing, and really bring this market to fulfillment. So thank you, Bernd. Thank you everyone for participating today. I believe our next series in the series will come out early next year, so you'll hear more about that soon. So thanks everyone very much. Have a great day or evening, depending on where you are, and we look forward to next time.